This is Seeds Podcast, bringing you tips, conversations, and information about applied behavior analysis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Seed Podcast. This is Season 3, Episode 5. So today I have my lovely co-host, Choo Ying, for the past four episodes. And then I also have our special guest here, Dr. Amanda Kelly, or, commonly known as Behavior Babe as well. I think I will let you, Dr. Kelly, to introduce yourself because I don't know where to begin. So I think it's best to let you introduce yourself. But let me first tell the audience, we have you on today because we wanted to talk to you about how ABA can also make a difference in changing how people treat the environment and and in the topic of sustainability. So that's why we have Dr. Kelly here with us. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for this invite. I will keep it brief. I think maybe our experiences will be more exciting than my bio. I am Dr. Amanda Kelly. As far as sustainability goes, have always been interested in my whole life. I remember my parents bought me a book about 100 ways children can save the world. And so I would walk around and turn off the water when my family was brushing their teeth, or shut off the lights as soon as they walked out of a room. Sometimes to the point where they would say, I'm walking right back in the room, leave the lights on. And I'm like, okay, but the earth, they would tease me about that sometimes. And I also was always interested in education and being a teacher. And my parents tell stories to my friends now of when I was 5, 6, 7, and I would run school. And they would say, even the neighborhood older children would come over. They're like, we don't know why you have 10, 11-year-olds at your school when you're 7 and 8 years old. And I was like, well, learning is fun and infectious. So when I first met the first child I ever met with autism, and there was a flyer in my college dorm and it said, we're just looking for some part-time help. It's our child has autism. We'll train you in this thing called applied behavior analysis. And I didn't know what autism was. I didn't know what applied behavior analysis was. I just knew the boy looked so adorable and his family seemed so caring. And I was like, let me just go meet them. And when I did, it changed my life. It put me on the path for my career. And one of the most incredible pieces about that was just realizing the power of the science, which at the time, we weren't even really doing that formally. There wasn't yet the behavior analysts weren't yet board certified. So it was earlier on. And it was just really incredible. So once I discovered how impactful behavior analysis could be, I decided to dedicate my entire career to learning about it and disseminating and sharing the information. So I had lived in West Virginia at the time. I moved to Massachusetts to pursue learning about applied behavior analysis. I lived there for 11 years and decided to go to Hawaii. I was like, I'm going to live in a place where it's beautiful because I've missed how many vacations going to grad school. And it was really there where I'm on an island and you're very dependent on your environment, on the food you eat, the electricity you produce. And it just became even more, I became even more aware of my impact on my environment and wanted to share what I learned and was thinking with everybody else. So that's it. That's me in a nutshell.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's great. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing the journey. So, when you mentioned that you moved to Hawaii, you decided to volunteer with the Hawaiian Monk Seal, which led you to the No Straw for Me movement. So can you tell us a little bit more about the No Straw for Me movement? How did it came about and, why straw?
Yes, absolutely. I think those are two stories that merge into one really nicely. So prior to moving to the Hawaiian Islands, I wanted to volunteer. I truly believe that we can show others the impact of our science once we show them that we care about what they're doing and we get involved in what's important to us in our community. So I wanted to participate. I wanted to give to the place where I was going to be living, not being originally from Hawaii, of course. I wanted to make sure that I was becoming acclimated to the culture. And so before I moved there, I set up to volunteer. The Hawaiian monk seals, if you're not aware, are an endangered species. There are less than 1,000 who are remaining in the world, and they are native and indigenous to the Hawaiian Islands. And it's very rare to see one. And on my very first morning there, I woke up because I was used to East Coast time and it was really early, and I sat by the beach and it was dark. And I must have sat there for about an hour. As the sun was coming up, I heard this very loud sneeze, and I was so startled, and much closer than I would have been had I known the seal was there. There was a Hawaiian monk seal, and many people said that that is very special and very unique. And of course, I felt that way, and we had just this one-on-one moment, which is so hard to find in a world full of chaos and commotion and energy and electricity and excitement. It was just so peaceful. So what my role was is that the part of the island I lived on, there were not any other volunteers. It was the North Shore of Oahu, where big wave surfing occurs. And so when a seal would haul out onto the shore, they would call me and say, we need you to go and put up a perimeter. And then you would spend hours there educating the public and trying to keep the seal safe and keep the public safe. And it was really interesting because using behavior analysis, like instinctually, I wanted to say, get away from the seal. What are you doing? What are you thinking? This is a wild animal. But that's not how we would operate with science. So I started by saying, yes, this is so cool. I was really intrigued too. Let me tell you some fun facts. Let me answer questions that you have. And it was really incredible. I met a wonderful community. It was volunteer. So it was, if I was available, but often I would make myself available to help the earth / also sit on the beach for how long and enjoy my day, which is wonderful. And the more time you spend outside, the more time you're with your environment. I would look at the trash on the beach and I would say, gosh, I don't understand why people are leaving their trash. Let me think on this. And then the really stark and dire reality occurred to me that the trash was not being left behind. The trash was arriving. It was coming from the waves onto our shores. Now, sometimes people would leave trash behind, yes, and that's a different matter to tackle. But every day I would walk the beach, and I'm so blessed to say there would be sea turtles, and it's, again, pretty remote location. And I have photos of myself picking up pen caps, straws, toothbrushes, and there would be two handfuls of plastic, and then a turtle, 50 feet away. And I thought, gosh, that turtle can't do anything about this. I can. So I started thinking to myself, well, I'll pick up this trash, and then where am I going to put it? I'm going to put it back in a trash can. And then what's going to happen to it? Somebody's going to put it back into the ocean or into the earth or burn it and put it into the air. And I thought to myself, this is a cycle I need to disrupt for myself. So I thought, I'm going to decrease consumption. I'm going to stop using certain things that I don't need to use. And it was as simple as that. It really was. And it's like, you could have told me, hey, you could stop using straws, for example, and it wouldn't have had the same impact. It was the sort of the connection of everything right there, full circle. And so I thought, let me pick the easiest thing to change. I don't use straws. I don't need straws. Surely this is going to be so easy. And it's not. Behavior change is not easy. And so I learned that, or was reminded of that as well. So when I got interested, I thought, I have a platform. People are listening or coming and asking and are aware of what I'm doing. Let me use this platform to share what's really important to me. And a master's and a doctorate in behavior analysis, working with children and adults with autism and related disabilities my entire career. This is also a personal passion, and we have the tools to approach it. So I did say to a good friend of mine, what if I started a group? Do you think, or what if we started a hashtag? Do you think anybody would care? And she said, you know how many people it takes to make a group, right? And I just looked at her and she held up 2 fingers and she said, you start it, I'll join it, and we'll see if anybody else comes. And that's exactly what we did that night. And many other people did join us on that journey. And that's where it started, the No Straw for Me movement.
Like, that's great. Like, oh my gosh.
Well, it made it to Malaysia. It did. It did. And like you say, it's so hard. It's so hard. I'm like, I'm going to do this. And then I go out and I'm like, what, drinking from a glass with ice in it without straw is just so weird. And you're like, no, I need my straw. And then like, okay, get these, those reusable ones. And then, well, they're just different. They feel different in your mouth. They do something weird to your teeth. And then it's just, okay, well, let's just have tea then, right? That's we don't need straw. Let's have something warm or something hot. We don't need straw for that. But yes, it's hard. It's so hard. It's like training a whole new set of behaviors all together, right?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And you mentioned so many of those variables. And with any behavior change, we have to do an assessment first. So what is the motivator? Why does somebody find it reinforcing? What is it that they want from that? Is it because their teeth are sensitive and it's too cold to have ice or a drink go straight into, from a cup into your mouth? Is it because they don't want to mess up their makeup? And so they'd rather, drink through the straw instead of, again, there were so many different pieces and variables. And for me, I found it was really dependent on what I was drinking. So if I was having a smoothie from one of the food trucks, I need a straw. I don't want to be smacked in the face with blended fruit, different things for sure. But one of the ways that I was able to start altering my behavior was taking an account of that and becoming aware with that. So even how we think about collecting ABC data, right? Antecedent, behavior, consequence, what comes before the behavior, what's the target behavior, what comes after, that applies. So I was like, okay, when do I get straws? When does this behavior happen? What are my motivators? And I wasn't looking to change anybody else's behavior. I was looking to change my own. And I think that is very important because my motivation was already there. The reinforcer was automatic, internal. And I think other people got interested, got inspired. I think knowing your local community, again, I lived on the North Shore of an island in Hawaii. So it was really easy to get people to say, I care about the earth, because they do care about the earth. And it's so ingrained into that community. Whereas when I go maybe to a state that is landlocked in the United States, like Nevada, they'll put 2 straws in every drink. And I'm like, why are you putting 2 straws in this drink? I can't even suck through this straw. It's not functional. So start where it's easier and work from there. So one thing that I did was, I had to start drinking beer and wine instead of cocktails. When I would go out, I would say, okay, I'm not going to order a cocktail because it's almost always going to have a straw. So that was one thing I did. We talk about reusable straws. They are great. They can be amazing. They can be very helpful. You have to clean them. You have to carry them around. It's additional, like you said, behaviors to develop in your repertoire. Now I have to have the carrying the straw behavior, the cleaning the straw behavior, the strange look behavior, they get from other people. But it's so funny that we're talking about that because I'm drinking right now and I have a reusable straw. And this is a silicone straw, so it can like really be bent up. I enjoy like chewing on the straws, and I think there is some sensory component to that is not available when you have a metal straw or even a bamboo straw. So you could do preference assessments. This is where ABA is everywhere. And so for me, I love the silicone straws. I can clean them easy. I can roll them up. They can fit wherever. It's not a big deal. But I also tell people one of the lessons I learned was behavior change is also imperfect. So if you end up not where you want to be, just stop and reassess. Or if you're like, gosh, I haven't gotten a straw in a week, a month, a year. And then I moved to Florida and I got 4 straws in one day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible. And I have forgotten all of the things I know about science. And it's not. Actually, if we look at what we know about science, it makes sense. Your environment changes, your behavior has to change. So that is definitely an influence on whether it's easier or not, and what your personal preferences are.
That's wow. It's like, I bet it's really not easy to start it all by yourself and your friend, like you say, just the 2 of you. And then even though you say start local, start with something small, but I bet it's not easy at all, because if you are like, because thinking back, the no straw movement is not as such a big thing now compared to like before. Like I think now it's quite a big thing, but before that's probably only a few people doing it. So like, how do you, I don't know, like what, like how do you feel, or like or how do you how do other people see you, when you say to them that I don't want straw, how do restaurant or how do bars attend to you?
There was so much, there has been so much of a difference in the reactions. And I really do appreciate you giving the context of what was going on in the environment in our world in 2016, 2017, which is when I was really first kind of honing in on this. And nobody was talking about single-use plastics. I mean, it really wasn't the conversations like it has been over the last few years. And so I definitely got a lot of strange looks, but I also chose the establishments I went to. I live at the time in a very small town. There was only 4 restaurants. So you get to know people, you can leverage the relationships, you can establish the relationships, you can incentivize. I know for me, I first needed an antecedent intervention because I would forget to say no straw. And then I'd be like, oh no. I started with stickers and I put them on the back of my cell phone. And because we all carry our cell phones, fortunately or unfortunately. And so it would be there. And when you'd put it face down on the back, I would go, oh yeah, like just a reminder, or people would see it. And sometimes it would be a conversation starter. And so even talking about behavior change, like that's not enough on its own, but it is a part of the change process, right? We engage in conversations, we get feedback, we get reinforcement, we might get some of our behavior might be punished. I know when I would go out to eat, sometimes I would say, oh, no straw for me. And they go, okay. And then other people at the table are like, give me 4 straws, give me 5 straws, just to be somewhat facetious. And so I would say, to people, you're welcome to get a straw. This is my behavior. This is my change. This is what's important to me. And I tried really hard not to impose it on other people and not to impact what they wanted out of their dining experience. And I found the more I was able to do that and really focus on myself, the more people actually started approaching it with curiosity instead of with this resistance. So people would go like, oh, that's really neat. That's really cool. They're like, why straws? Why'd you pick straws? Well, you might remember I told you pen caps, toothbrushes, straws, they're all the same shape, right? I'm holding a pen right now. And one of the pieces of research I did, because hey, you can't change behavior without looking at the literature and the research base. There is some research about behavior analysts and behavior change related to sustainability, definitely. But a lot of the research came from another field or other fields altogether, right? Environmentalism, marine, biology, how does this impact the animals, how does it impact the food that we eat? So again, in Hawaii, we're eating a lot of fresh fish, and that fish is coming from a polluted ocean. And so that is something that families need to sustain the way that they are living. And so it did become something that the community really started to embrace. And then so exciting. I mean, it became this like bigger movement. And I was like, I didn't start that. Like, no, I'm pretty sure there's like some other celebrity, like real big, out there in the world celebrity who did this. But I actually had really incredible conversations with different foundations like the Kukua Foundation, which is founded by Jack Johnson, who's a musician. There was also Blue Planet, I believe. There's just these different movements, and we got connected. They're like, hey, we're interested in this. We're doing this movement. We have this celebrity, and we just see you all over the internet. We don't know who you are, but can we have a phone call? Can we talk? And I got really inspired by that. Also, at the same time, we were advocating for autism insurance and licensure for behavior analysts. We were at the state capitol a lot. So being involved with politics, I started thinking like, oh, do we have any legislation? Do we have any interest? Do we have any movement about making things a rule versus individual behavior change? If I walked into a restaurant and they had straws made out of agave, or they had pasta straws, or they had paper straws, or they had all of these different choices of straws, would I really need one? Or if we made it that you had to ask, like we now see when you order like delivery or takeout here in many different places, they now say add utensils, and you have to add it to your order. So these kinds of changes that can happen at a company or a corporate level, or even larger for a state or a county, that can have almost that like domino ripple effect on all the individual behavior change. So I do think that people can change the world themselves. I just think it will take a lot longer, and it's a lot easier if we do it together.
And now we're, living in this pandemic, and then we have, a lot of one-time use, and you're done. So Oh, yeah, just
Yeah,
yeah.
that's been slightly crushing my soul, I would say, in more ways than one, the pandemic itself. But yeah, a lot of single-use items where I try to find my comfort in that was that we saw a lot of rejuvenation of certain wildlife when people were staying home. We saw a decrease in pollution when people were not driving and emissions. So I try to be like, okay, wait a second. We had some very significant positive improvements on the environment as a result of everybody kind of staying in and staying home. But yes, and so when we're thinking about behavior change as well, we need to ask ourselves, like, what is the most important in the moment? So if I'm going to have a single use item because I cannot refill my bottle at a public facility for water or something like that, am I going to then not drink any water and be outside all day and be dehydrated? Or am I going to say, okay, right now, a pandemic pass, if you will. And what I would say is, don't be too hard on yourself. The environment has shifted. Definitely can be a personal priority, and it still is of mine. But I'm a little bit more understanding if I make some mistakes at this time or if I don't have the options. And I think what happens with behavior change is if it's not in our repertoire, if we're not given the opportunity to practice it, even going out and saying no straw, like I haven't had that opportunity in how long? And now I go out and I'm like, 4 straws in 1 week. Oh my gosh, I thought I was good at this behavior change. Maybe I just had removed all my opportunities. When we had people who were in the group, so hashtag no straw for me, we do have a group. It's a little less active now because it seems a lot of people are on board and doing it in their life and have gone forth and disseminated this information. I just think, like I said, that energy is really incredible. That piece I was talking about with legislation, you're going to get a lot of resistance if people feel like it's being forced on them. So again, if you find the motivation that people have, like I care about the earth, I want decreased costs for restaurants. Restaurants can save money if they don't have to buy a whole bunch of single-use items. And so again, I really appreciate that there's these slight changes like adding your utensils to the cart and so forth. In Hawaii, we did actually pass on Oahu. So it was a county initiative for the island of Oahu, Honolulu County, the world's strongest single-use bill to ban single-use items. And they came with replacements. So you needed to go container. Here are the 50 plant-based ones. These are the ones that don't break down when you put your, ramen or salmon in it. These are the ones that you can get when you go to Zippy's and have your favorite, like, Loco Moco or whatever your local things are. And when we were talking to the community, some of the most incredible members of the community who really pushed forward that change were children and teenagers and young adults. And they said, this is our world and we need your help. And I was like, wow, to see the mayor honoring the youth and to see their just their activism and their passion, it rejuvenated me and my energy, because it can be kind of depressing when other people are like, aren't there bigger problems in the world, Amanda, to solve? Why do you care about this? And I think I care about it because it's just one part of a class of behaviors. So I no longer use single-use paper towels. I now have different items. I carry utensils. I have them right here in my drawer for being at work. I'm not going to use the plastic that's out there. I've actually worked with my employer to decrease the plastic use that we have in our locations. I have reusable coffee pods instead of the single-use pods. My parents are very supportive, maybe less critical than when I was 5 and shutting off the water and the lights. But my mom says, like, Amanda, I like having, soda, and it comes in this little bottle, and I don't want to buy the bigger one, and I don't want the soda stream. And I said, okay, fine. Can you do me one thing? Can you spend 2 weeks and take inventory of the single-use plastics or the single-use items you have? Is it a toothpick? Is it a Q-tip? Is it dental floss? What is it? And so she did that. And at the end of 2 weeks, she said, you know what I don't need anymore? I don't need these Q-tips that have the plastic middle. I'm going to get rid of that. And I was like, that's cool. And that's enough, because starting is enough. Because once you start, you generally don't stop.
That is so cool. I mean, hearing you, sharing all these stories with us and your experiences with us, I'm hearing like, that's ABA, that's behavior analysis. Oh yeah, that's absolutely ABA, but for our audience out there and our listener, you know, they probably don't make that connection, or like, you know, that's just, you know, that's just, I don't know what, you know, they'll see it as, because for me now, I'm just, everything, it's kind of like, oh, that's totally ABA. So I guess, you know, Amanda, your training and your, you know, your earlier on experiences with individuals with autism, right? So, and you know, when you're working on this project, when you're, you know, doing this movement, was it just kind of automatic for you that to think that way, or did you have to kind of like, wait, okay, let me, you know, apply that science, right? And or was it really automatic for you to like, oh, that's, yeah, that's totally what I would do, you know, because it just comes naturally for you?
It's a great question, and it's a very fair question. And what I'll say to people is you do not need a master's or doctorate in behavior analysis to engage in behavior change. And also having one does not make change necessarily easier. So I encourage everybody, particularly any analysts out there, to do a self-change project, whatever it is, because it will humble you. It will remind you, hey, parents are trying their best, right? Maybe somebody sabotaged that plan. Maybe somebody else gave access to a reinforcer. Hey, maybe the, you know, bartender put in the straw and the hostess didn't tell them. Like, behavioral sabotage can occur, right? So I've talked to you about antecedents and reinforcers and having, you know, the things ahead of time and working on larger change. But the thing that I didn't do with intention that I would do differently was I didn't set an intentional way of measuring at the onset of the change. So, I mean, I kind of did, like, I started collecting my straws. So I did permanent product. Like, so I had them in a container, and I made myself take them home, and I made myself put them in a container and look at them. So it actually became a data collection system and an intervention, because I would walk by my kitchen or walk out my door and see my cup of straws and be like, okay, I'm not coming home with any more straws, you know? So I think that there could have been more ways to be systematic. I didn't have, you know, a delayed multiple baseline and reversals and all these sorts of things, because I wasn't interested in undoing the behavior. And quite honestly, I had no idea that my personal behavior change initiative and using the platform would get where it got. So yeah, there's definitely things that I would perfect, or if we were going to publish this up, things that you might want to be more precise about. But also to speak to your question, I think once a scientist, once you really truly immerse yourself, and for me at this time, I have 2 decades of experience, so certain things do become a bit automated. I know I was mentioning some stuff about the legislation. The most important thing there is pairing reinforcement and considering negative reinforcement. So you want me to go away? You're all done talking about the straws. You don't want to hear anything about single-use plastics anymore? No problem. Pass the bill. We'll leave you alone. Look at that. Negative reinforcement. The removal of potentially annoying, maybe not aversive condition, right? That leads to an increase in the future. So what I would sometimes do would be influenced subconsciously by behavior analysis. And then I go, oh, I can label it. I can describe it. And then other times I'd be like, okay, let me be really intentional. Let me be really intentional and use what I know about the science. So both were true.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's really, so I'm just trying to process this whole thing. Is like, whoa, it's really mind-blowing and all that. And I think it's really cool. And you also mentioned that, you know, I like how you say that all behavior change have to start from ourselves. Like, you know, as a behavior analyst, you do something like a self-change. Because I think often that when we are so immersed working with like our clients and all, we forget about how tricky it is to have a behavior change, you know. So they always start from ourselves, and you know, if you stop doing that, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be able to understand that the process that it takes to make changes happen and all that. So I'm still processing of what you say, like, oh yes, you know, we do make changes.
It's so easy to tell somebody else how to change their behavior, right? And it can become so instinctual, and that's our role. I mean, they've asked us to support them, whoever we are working with, and they say, this is my challenge, and we say, okay, here's our plan. And then we might walk into a home environment or be at a clinic or at a classroom, and we say, why didn't you take this data? You told me you were going to take this data. And of course, we may not say it like that, but we may be thinking it a little bit like that. Like, I don't understand. And instead of using that as a judgment, use it as an observation. Why didn't they take the data? Was it too hard? Hey, was it hard for me to take data on straws? No, but would I rather go to the beach and swim right now than graph my data? Yes. So, can I use permanent product? Can I get a different simplified way to create data? So even doing that, like, for myself, really, really, really recentered me on, again, just how challenging change is and how you need small reinforcers along the way. If the reinforcement schedule is way too thin, even if it's really dense, passing a law is incredible. Wow, that is a big reinforcer. That happens like 1 every 7 years, if that, right? So that is not going to sustain my behavior all the time. Finding behavior that's important, not just to our clients, but interventions that then allow them to access internal or automatic reinforcement. Again, I kind of really was brought back to that center through this experience. And I keep smiling because I just find it so not strange, but bizarre. I'm like, yes, this is so cool. We're still talking about this and that change is happening. And, you were talking about, well, it's made it to Malaysia. The first sense of something like that was I was contacted by a radio station in New Zealand. And they're like, hello, we've heard about what you're doing. We saw that through your state chapter of behavior change. You're at the state capitol. Can we talk to you? And I'm like, yeah, I get, sure. And, it was really amazing and incredible because also it's an island. Also, it's, surrounded by the water. Also, they have some of these challenges. And so what I noticed when I started the group in particular is that it was people who live by the ocean. It was people in Florida, but certain parts of Florida, people in Massachusetts, California. And I was like, oh, okay. And again, just really remembering our environment. So I think back to, B.F. Skinner, right? If you can't change the behavior, change your environment. Mm-hmm. And I think conversely, when you change your environment, like moving physically to a new state, then you're going to have to adjust and change your behavior. So remembering that, I think, really helps me become a better consultant. And so even when I was invited to speak at like autism conferences, I'd say, can I talk about straws? And they would say, well, yes, you can. It's behavior change. But what does it have to do with autism? And I said, well, I want to talk about how this behavior change self-project has made me a better consultant, how it really has. And I think emphasizing that for people and sharing what those lessons learned also helps people see that you can have a doctorate in this field, you can be working 20 years, and you can still be very imperfect, and that's okay. And you can still achieve change. So I'm really appreciative of this opportunity, of the conversation, and my mind is blown that Malaysia, like, what? That's incredible. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Well, we're surrounded by water too. We're a peninsula,
right?
We're surrounded by water. But I thought, like, this is really unique. Like a lot of the guests that came on our season 3 podcast, we all have something in common, which is, we're all BCBAs and we have training in behavior analysis, but a lot of time there's a lot of focus on just one thing. Like, for example, me, I'm working with early learners with autism, and then we interview a couple people and they're either in school or they're doing OBM, but I think what's unique about, this interview is you can be passionate about 2 different things, and and that's okay. You don't have to be, and it's fine. I can, I'm really passionate about the environment and I want to apply the science here, but at the same time, I'm really good at, working with, children or adults or, so that's it. Just because sometimes I think I'm not speaking for all the BCBAs out there, but just speaking for myself, I often feel like, oh, you got to become really good at one thing, and that's going to be your thing. And unless, like Choo Ying say, I'm going to, switch, every 4 years or 5 years and do something else. But this is really cool. And that's why I had this question about, could you share some advice, with some of like our BCBA listeners out there who wish to apply the science beyond their current field of practice, but they're worried, like, but I don't know anything about, the environment, but I do think that it would be cool. I mean, I care about this little thing, but I don't think I'll make such a huge impact. What are some, thoughts, advice for people like myself, that volunteering experience, that, just listening to them, like, that's a good way to start. I was reading and thinking about, I was thinking, that's a good way to start, what's important to me. And that got me thinking, that really got me thinking. I'm like, well, maybe that's what I'll do. I'll start volunteering somewhere. And then, so.
That's a fantastic slew of questions. Actually, I have so much to chime in and say about that. One is, if you're going to be passionate about one thing and one thing only, let it be the science, let it be behavior change. It does not need to be a slice of the science. It doesn't need to be autism only or gerontology only. Let it be your guide, like truly in your life. Do you have a spouse who leaves all of their clothes and their wet towel on the floor? Hey, what do we know about positional prompts? Move the hamper closer to where the floors are. What do we know about using within stimulus prompts? Look, there's a big sign, put your clothes in here. What do we know about reinforcers? Hey, I made you your favorite thing for breakfast. I mean, there are just so many different ways to take behavior analysis to elevate our own lives and the lives of individuals around us. I definitely appreciate, though, that we have focused and honed in so much on helping, I would say, vulnerable populations and people who have a lot of needs. The same was true with the monk seals. My mom actually made a statement to me, oh, you picked something lighthearted to go volunteer with, Amanda. No, you picked an endangered species who's going extinct. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but that's so connected to my values. So what I would say to listeners and to behavior analysts in particular is, identify your values, label them, and then choose activities and projects that really align with them. So for me, I want to be more physically active all the time. Okay, look, I know a ton about behavior analysis. I'm pretty sure I could design a program, but I haven't yet. Why? What's my motivation? What are my values? So I've realized I love being outside. I love helping other people. Great. Let's turn exercise into volunteering. Let's turn exercise into education. Let's wrap these things together. And what I will say to everybody here too is, dream big, but start small. If you don't think that your behavior matters, then why do you think anyone else's behavior matters? I think we need to really separate that, because when we're being objective, we feel empowered. But when we are kind of looking at ourselves, sometimes we feel confused and we're like, well, I don't know. And that's okay. That's why we talk about being objective and how important it is to be observable and measurable and less emotional. So sometimes maybe we need guides and supports and groups, and maybe we create them or maybe we join them. Everyone has a part to play. And I think that what your involvement looks like may be very different than what my involvement looks like. But fortunately, we're not competing with one another. This is a collaborative thing that we're trying to do. So you do your, and I'll do my part, and together we'll get further. You mentioned about, that piece of volunteering. I tell everyone everywhere, do that, volunteer. If you want to know where to help, look around you. The world is full of problems, which can be really depressing or it can be really inspiring. I like to say challenges versus problems, because you tell me a problem and I feel like that's a heavy weight to carry. You tell me challenge and I'm like, accepted. Like, let's go forth and change the world. One person, one day, one straw, even at a time.
Yeah. And I think just opening yourself to contacting these natural contingencies, these reinforcements that are out there, and just, providing that opportunity for you to contact them more frequently than if you were just to do the same thing, you got to
change it up.
It makes so much sense. Yes.
And the thing I would add to this is it doesn't have to be your career. This is not my career. I don't make money off of reducing straw use. I didn't get to pay my bills or my rent or my mortgage because we passed this initiative. No, that's not it at all. I still have my day job. Absolutely. So it's the other piece, though, is how can you take these two things and blend them together? So I want to tell you, if I can, a quick short story. Well, I'll make it short. I'll give you the shortened version. So as I was volunteering with the monk seals, they had this opportunity to go to Sea Life Park, Hawaii, which is a place where you have animals who they show you that they've been trained, conservation, and so forth. And there was an opportunity to man the booth, to stand at the booth for the monk seal education, right next to a monk seal who had been injured and blind in one eye, and they take good care of that seal there. And I wanted to go and see. I wasn't sure how I felt about animals in captivity. I had a lot of questions. I did care a lot about education. So here I am again, an opportunity to work with children, to inspire the youth. That taps into my background as an elementary education teacher and behavior analyst, but then also helping animals and the earth. So I went to this training, and I was sitting there, it's like a couple of hours, and they're showing us like, here's a slide, and here's what you're going to learn, and here's what you're going to know, and here's the curator. And then there was this one slide, and it said operant conditioning. And it said, B.F. Skinner, the scientist, what we do here is based off of the principles of behavior change and behavior analysis. And this is a photo of him when he visited our facility, and this is his daughter. And I said, oh, that must be Deborah, not Julie. And I didn't even mean to say it out loud, but he has 2 children, and Deborah and Julie. And they looked at me and they were like, excuse me? And I was like, oh, well, Dr. Vargas, so Dr. Julie Vargas, she's never been to Hawaii. She told me that because I had moved there. And so I knew it wasn't her in the photo. And I have not met her sister, but I know that by default must be her sister. And they were like, how do you know this? And I was like, well, this was after now the training. Now they have like the curator talking to me. How do you know this? And I said, well, she's actually our invited speaker at our conference at the Hawaii Association for Behavior Analysis next month. And I know she had never been, and she was excited to come to Hawaii. And he was like, you know this person? You know B.S. Skinner's daughter? And I was like, yeah, it's really cool, isn't it? She's so incredible. She's an incredible behavior analyst and educator on her own in her own right, but absolutely. And I was like, why don't you guys come to our conference and present on animal applications? And this will be so cool. And they're like, oh no, we can't do that. It's our 50th, anniversary. We have all these big events. Like, oh. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I went home and I thought on it for about a day or two. And then I sent the curator an email. And I said, aloha, Jeff. Dr. Vargas will be in town on Thursday, and we will be at your facility from 12 to 4. We appreciate the behind the scenes tour. Thank you. There will be 4 of us. They never invited us to come. That was not an offer. But hey, sometimes you just act like it is. You invite yourself to the event, to the party. And so I wrote this, and they wrote back, and they were like, we would be so thrilled. We didn't know you could come to us. And I was like, okay, it worked. So myself and 2 colleagues of mine and ours and Dr. Vargas, we got a 4-hour behind the scene tour at Sea Life Park, Hawaii. They talked to us about shaping group contingencies, teaching dolphins to do things together, showing us how they can get a dolphin now to turn over in the water for up to 90 seconds so they can do a blood draw. The dolphin will flip back over. In the past, they would drain the tank. It was traumatizing to the animal. And so they showed how the science has helped them decrease sort of those concerns and anxieties and fears and trauma for the animals that they're researching and supporting. And what was another really cool connection was I was reading a book written by a parent called Chaos to Calm, talking about tag teach and acoustical guidance. And in the foreword of the book, it said, and Sea Life Park, Hawaii, which was founded by Karen and Tad Pryor. Karen Pryor popularized clicker training, don't shoot the dog. And I was like, get out. So there was this whole full connection to behavior analysis and monk seals and education. So just open yourselves up and you realize your passions might very well intertwine themselves.
Wow, that's quite a story.
What a small world.
It is. And I say small world, smaller field, right?
Yeah.
Small world, smaller field. And the world is small if we allow it to be. We can be connected. And I think the more that people have this belief that other people matter, not just ourselves, and that the world matters, and that we want to do things not just for ourselves, but for our children or our grandchildren, literally, I think will impact people and their behavior change. Dr. Scott Geller is a friend and a colleague of mine, and he talks a lot about actively caring for people and actively caring for change. And he was actually presenting one year at our conference, and he said, if we start caring more about each other, like we will get, further faster together. And I went on the stage after him and was doing the talk about straws. And I said, listen, you don't have to care about each other to save the world. You don't, but it will help. It will really, really help. And so I find a lot of motivation and passion from his position as well. And so again, expose yourself, listen to people, read things, talk to someone, find your passions, and realize you already have the tools, you already have them,
Mhm.
and you just may not have really thought of it
Yeah.
outside of your, your day-to-day life. We're so busy, we're so invested, we're so exhausted after we pour from our cup all the time. So if you can find a way where you're still giving but getting back at the same time,
Mhm.
I think you're going to be more likely to sustain that change and that motivation over time.
Mm. Hey, we're on a topic of sustainability, right? So
Sustainable sustainability.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Amanda Kelly. Choo Ying, do you have any other questions? Because
No, not really. I think that was really inspirational. Like everything that you say, everything you tell us is like, wow. Like how can we do? And I think it's definitely not easy to, to do all that. I don't think people have the awareness that, their own behavior can make a big change to the world. Like what you mentioned earlier, they keep thinking, like people might think that, no, I can't do this by myself. What's the point of me doing it when I'm alone? I need to do it in a big group and all that. But that's not the case. Sometimes, the changes start from yourself.
I had no idea that anybody else was listening, to be honest. And some people may not believe that. They say, oh, you have all these followers, you have this podcast. I'm like, yeah, I appreciate that. And I understand data is telling me that somebody's listening, but I don't know who, and I don't know to what extent, or sometimes what it has impacted. And occasionally I get messages from somebody who says, this is something that's changed my life in this way. This is something I heard. Even like a week ago, or even also this invite to come talk about this, I was like, wow, people are still interested in something that is so important to me, but that was even kind of a couple of years ago. And I'm really encouraged and reinforced by that. So again, thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation and to meet you both.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you
wonderful.
for agreeing to do this together with us. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. And hope to chat with you again sometime soon.
Yes. Even though I'm in Florida, I'll still say aloha.
I know. That's cool. All right. Well, thank you.
And that was Dr. Amanda Kelly sharing with us her experiences in applying the science of ABA towards issues in environmental sustainability. Once again, thank you, Dr. Amanda Kelly, for joining us at Seed Podcast.